You know what we used to call Dana's pet projects. Greg's voice oozes from my laptop speakers like a grease fire in a locked basement, the museum of failed ideas. Laughter erupts, real gut-punching, slap-the-table laughter. I pause the video just as his smug little grin catches the mic. That smirk burned into my memory like acid etching glass. I've watched that moment enough times to memorize every snicker, every eye roll, every sycophantic clap from my former teammates, the same people who called me the brain when they needed a bailout, but never had my back in public. They're all in that room now, circling like vultures. But the carcass they're tearing into is me. This time, I let the video roll. Greg sips from his monogram thermos like he's dispensing wisdom, not just coasting on inherited contracts. Don't worry, he chuckles. We cleared out that idea graveyard back in Q2. More laughter. Louder. I don't blink. I move my cursor. Save as. Rename, laugh track, beats, bleed out. Final, .mp4. Then I drag it into a deep archive on my secure drive marked receipts. Inside that folder, the full Liberty Care pitch deck, time-stamped. The email where Greg called it too disruptive for our current roadmap. The notarized rejection letter. My licensing agreement with Corewell Systems. This video, it's not just a joke. It's Exhibit A in a reckoning. Evidence doesn't cry, doesn't shout. It waits, cold, sharp, like a loaded weapon no one sees coming. I close the laptop like sealing a tomb. The room feels still, not empty charged. Like the air is bracing for something. Outside Chicago's skyline flickers behind the glass. Monuments to men like Greg full of noise, hollow at the core. But tonight, they don't scare me. They look weak. Like one gust of truth could knock them over. Exactly 1 year ago, I stood in that same all-hands meeting prototype in hand-pitching Liberty Care while Greg scrolled through his phone. I believed then, naively, that merit could win. I don't believe that anymore. Now I believe in documentation, in contracts, in patience sharpened into power, and in what happens next. I used to believe that good ideas could win. But now I know better. Now I know how to weaponize rejection. Because what that room full of clapping yes men didn't know, and what Greg, in all his smug indifference, never even thought to ask, was that Liberty Care wasn't dead. It wasn't abandoned. It was evolving. Quietly, legally, under the radar, fully armed and patient. Their laughter became my fuel. Greg's voice. The match. That video, he laughed through. It's now the final nail in his legacy. Proof on record that he dismissed the very thing that would unravel him. I stood up from my desk, stretched, and felt my spine crack like a trigger resetting. No anger, no tears, just calculation. They mocked the ghost of a prototype. But now they'll choke on its return. My first mistake had been trying to play the part. Navy blazer straightened hair heels that made me walk like I was on ice. I dressed for acceptance. I should have dressed for war. By the time I clicked to slide 2 of my pitch, Greg was already halfway into scrolling through his phone. Today, I want to share a project I've developed off hours. I said, my voice steady. Codename Liberty Care. I'd spent 6 months compiling patient data trends, efficiency forecasts, even had a nursing student animate the interface over her spring break. This is a predictive, affordable, low-code healthcare intake platform with adaptive personalization. Greg didn't look up. His phone buzzed once, twice. Then he chuckled. While I was explaining how Liberty Care could cut clinic intake time by 38%. But I kept going. Because that's what women in tech do. You present through the silence, through the disinterest, through the humiliation. When I finished, the room went quiet, painfully quiet. Greg blinked at the ceiling and muttered, "Appreciate the initiative, Dana. But it's not aligned with our current performance verticals." I waited for something, anything. A question, a note, nothing. He rubbed his temple and added, "It's interesting, but not really synergistic with our long-term vision." He actually said, synergistic. I pressed my nails into my palm and forced a smile. I tried to salvage it, pitching a pilot program using our Midwest clinic partners. He cut me off with a raised hand. "Let's just park it in the idea vault, okay? The trash bin." That's what he meant. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Greg held up his hand like I was interrupting his genius. Let's circle back if it becomes relevant. For now, just park it in the idea vault. Okay? Idea vault. That was his polite nickname for the corporate trash can where ambition went to die. He didn't even take the printed brief I'd handed him. Just stood, smoothed his suit jacket, and left the room. The pages fluttered from the AC vent behind him while I stood there in those stiff heels, clutching a breakthrough in my hands like it meant nothing. If you're inspired by stories of resilience and quiet victories, make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because the next chapter reveals just how far determination can take you. Join the journey and don't miss what happens next. An hour later, his email landed. Subject: Liberty Care Proposal, Body Dana. Thanks for your presentation. After reviewing your materials, we've decided not to move forward with Liberty Care at this time. Appreciate your effort. No feedback, no questions. Just a corporate dismissal, sprayed with Febreze. I read it 3 times, then forwarded it to my personal email, created a folder, rejected, Liberty Care, official docs. I exported the PDF, time-stamped it, encrypted it, and uploaded it to cold storage. Greg had no idea he'd just signed the first page of his own professional obituary. That night, barefoot in sweatpants and a faded band tee, I opened my private laptop, entered my 6-word password, and pulled up a file I hadn't touched in months. Plan B, Docs. I renamed it Liberty Care Rebirth H Confidential, VAV 1. 1. No more compromise. No more pitching value to men who couldn't see past their own job titles. Greg wanted synergy. He was about to get it through a competitor who actually had vision. The first time I contacted Corewell Systems, I did it anonymously. A burner Proton Mail account, logged in from a public library 15 miles away. Hoodie, sunglasses, and exact change for the parking meter. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being precise. This wasn't a resume drop into a recruiter black hole. This was bait-crafted, targeted, untraceable. Subject line: Strategic Opportunity. Confidential Healthcare Tech Body. I'm a senior-level product strategist with validated market research and a next-generation healthcare interface. Recently shelved by short-sighted leadership. Strong compatibility with Corewell Systems' growth focus. Willing to meet off-site to share a non-proprietary overview. Discretion required. I hovered over the send button, heart thudding, not from fear, but from hope. Maybe Liberty Care didn't have to die. Maybe I didn't have to bury my best work. I clicked send. I closed the browser, wiped the session, left the library, and drove home. In silence, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape and launch a startup of its own. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, while pretending to troubleshoot a broken slide deck for the UX team's quarterly review, my burner account pinged from stawsocorewellsystems.com, subject Strategic Opportunity Body. Thank you for your message. Your proposal is intriguing. We're open to a brief discussion under NDA to assess fit. Please share a secure method of communication and your availability for an off-site meeting. I stared at it like it had come from another planet. Polite, formal. But that last sentence, that was interest. That was real. Before I could hesitate, I set up a Signal account, attached a redacted overview of the Liberty Care platform. No code, no back-end specs, just a framework, and suggested a 30-minute coffee meeting at a modest hotel cafe near downtown Chicago. I signed it A. Liberty. He agreed within the hour. And just like that, I crossed the line from silence to strategy. I wasn't brooding anymore. I was engineering a quiet detonation that would eventually flatten Greg's polished kingdom. Every night that week, I worked in secret. No cloud saves, no slip-ups, just offline markdown editors and encrypted USBs tucked into the lining of my bra like holy relics. I rewrote the entire Liberty Care schematic with relentless precision, page by page, diagram by diagram, breathing life back into the vision they tried to bury. At work, I stayed invisible, smiled in meetings, nodded at nonsense. Let Greg believe I was still just another obedient cog in his safe, dull machine. But inside, I was fully awake. I wasn't waiting for approval anymore. I was building my own table, and I'd already started inviting the future to sit with me. The night before the meeting, I chose my outfit like a covert agent, neutral, unbranded. My laptop was wiped clean. My notebook had the first 10 pages torn out. Nothing traceable, nothing careless. When I walked into the cafe and saw the man in the dark suit, his badge flipped backward, I didn't flinch. I reached out my hand. He shook it. "Miss Liberty, I presume?" And in that moment, I wasn't overlooked. I wasn't erased. I was the guardian of everything they discarded. And now, finally, someone was willing to listen. The man from Corwell Systems introduced himself as Stephen Dawes, Strategy Development, early 50s, polite to a fault and sharp in the way only people who know how to turn uncertainty into leverage can be. He ordered an herbal tea he never touched and listened through the first 7 minutes of my Liberty Care pitch without saying a word. That alone made him smarter than 90% of the men I'd ever pitched to. I gave him the polished outline, stripped of all internal architecture, proprietary code, and identifiers. Just the vision, the framework, the scaffolding of something that could rebuild care delivery from the ground up. A modular AI-powered intake platform, real-time cross-clinic syncing, predictive analytics that grow with patient histories. Enough to intrigue, not enough to steal. By the third slide, I watched his body language shift from polite interest to full calculation. I saw it behind his glasses, the flicker of mental gears catching traction. When I finished, he sat back, folded his hands, and said, "You're either very brave or very tired." "Both," I answered. He didn't laugh. He just nodded like he understood. "I'd like to arrange a meeting with our product and legal teams. You'll need to bring proof of IP ownership." I slid one printed email across the table. Greg's formal rejection of Liberty Care. Dated, signed, and forwarded from my work account to my personal inbox, headers intact. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. Stephen read it carefully, looked up, and gave me the smallest, most meaningful nod I'd ever received. Let's talk terms. That night, I stared at my ceiling fan like it might spell out my future. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was real. The kind of real that rewrites lives. 2 weeks later, I was back at that same cafe, this time with 2 attorneys and a product lead from Corwell. 3 hours of negotiation. 3 contracts. No hand-holding. No proxy. I signed as Dana Mercer, sole IP holder and architect of Liberty Care. Clause 3.2, Corwell reserves exclusive rights to commercialization. Clause 7. 1 licensing fees negotiated after prototype review. Clause 12. NDA binding both parties, not their employee, their partner. I walked out of that cafe with a thumb drive full of potential and a signature that made everything official. The betrayal was complete. I had switched sides, no turning back. Back at my day job, I moved like a ghost. I still showed up to design reviews, still offered feedback on user flows I no longer believed in. But it all felt like watching someone else play me in a corporate documentary. Dana, the team player. Dana, the dependable one. Dana, who had just inked a licensing deal with Corwell Systems under Greg's oblivious nose. Every time he walked past my desk and gave that blank nod, I imagined slapping the signed agreement onto his laptop like a court summons. But I didn't, because this wasn't just about him anymore. Then came the email, subject team restructuring. Immediate effect. I knew the second I saw it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. HR delivered the news with a well-rehearsed sympathy, strategic realignment, nothing personal. A white box for my desk items. A folder with my severance package. I packed up slowly, mouse pad, branded mug, my old lanyard, while Greg walked by without a glance. No smirk, no acknowledgement. Just a pressed suit and his usual vacancy. But me, I smiled. Not bitter, not fake, free. That severance check. It wasn't a slight, it was startup capital. I deposited it before I even left the parking lot of a CVS. Then I pulled out my phone and called Stephen Dawes. I'm free, I said. Let's get to work. We built Liberty Care like a stealth weapon, quiet, fast, and unforgiving. No press releases, no leaks, just pure focused development at Corwell's off-grid skunkworks lab. 12-hour days surrounded by whiteboards, schematics, and engineers who spoke only in performance metrics and fail-over protocols. I hadn't felt that alive in years. Corwell's legal team moved like a scalpel. Within 3 weeks, we filed for full-stack patent protection interface, AI engine remote integration, all under my name. Every technical vision I'd ever mapped out for Liberty Care now lived inside a bulletproof patent portfolio, timestamped, notarized, and filed in 3 jurisdictions. The morning I signed the exclusive commercialization agreement, I didn't cry. I felt clean. Liberty Care wasn't a dream anymore. It was real. And now it had teeth. Meanwhile, back at the sinking ship, I used to call my employer. Someone left the digital vault door wide open. A junior manager, Travis, or maybe Trent, I never bothered to learn his name, was rummaging through old shared folders on the server, probably desperate for something shiny to slap his name on before performance reviews. And there it was, my original Liberty Care deck. Stripped of metadata, sure, but still intact. I'd left it there on purpose, buried, not deleted. He opened it, scanned it, thought he'd struck gold. 3 days later, I got a message from a burner LinkedIn account. It was from one of the few allies I had left inside. Hey, some weasel is claiming he found an old internal proposal and is pitching it to Greg like it's the next iPhone. It's your Liberty Care deck? Just FYI. I stared at the screen for a full minute, smiling. Then I typed back 3 words, I know. Let him. Because this was the bait, the trap I'd set the night I quietly forwarded Greg's rejection email to my private archive. Now, some overeager corporate ladder climber was dangling it in front of the boss, thinking he'd found a legacy maker. What did Greg see? A junior associate bringing him a forgotten, brilliant concept. Visionary. Raw. Just waiting for a savior. And of course, he bit. Within a week, industry blogs were buzzing. Unnamed healthcare tech firm investing millions into a flagship platform. No name, but the buzzwords were all there. Predictive care, AI integration, user-first redesign. Greg was even quoted on a podcast teasing a bold leap forward in digital health and how his company doesn't follow trends, we set them. I listened twice. Once, to transcribe his exact phrasing. And once, just to bask in the ignorance. Because while he was making promises about the future, I already owned it. Corwell had scheduled Liberty Care's public debut for early Q2 months ahead of Greg's phantom timeline. Demo footage, partner clinics, national rollout strategy. Meanwhile, Greg was siphoning budgets, poaching devs, betting his legacy on a blueprint I authored. He thought he was being clever, revolutionary, in control. But the blueprint, it was already sealed, and I was already watching. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was orchestration, and the first movement had just begun. He built a throne on top of it. 2 weeks after the internal buzz began, Helix Dynamics, my former employer, restructured its Q2 budget. Whole departments were gutted overnight. Wellness programs, data analytics, even parts of HR vanished, all to funnel cash into what Greg dubbed Project Ascend, like he was naming a moon mission and not just a stolen pitch deck he barely understood. At the next board meeting, he swaggered in late wearing a tailored blazer and that trademark smirk that always made him look like he just upsold oxygen to a drowning man. His big pitch, a full-scale launch plan, mock-ups, buzzwords, bluster, 6-figure marketing push. An impossible timeline, a reckless budget, and an ego set to detonate. A game changer, he called it. A category killer. He used phrases like vertical integration of behavioral diagnostics and adaptive interface personalization, word for word from the original Liberty Care proposal I'd written 14 months earlier. It was like watching someone plagiarize your journal and call it scripture. One of my quiet allies, still inside Helix, snapped a photo from the boardroom, Greg standing in front of a slide titled, "The Future of Patient Interaction, My Vision." I printed it, circled my and pinned it to my desk like a medal. The real gift came 3 days later. Greg appeared on a podcast, one of those smug tech industry brofests, hosted by a guy who misquotes Steve Jobs weekly. The host tossed him softball questions. Greg grinned and leaned in. I told my team not to bring me safe ideas, bring me disruptive ones. This project came from that culture of innovation I've built over the years. The host asked, "So this was your brainchild?" Greg paused for theatrical effect. "Well, let's just say I planted the seed." That podcast was recorded, saved, time-stamped, and filed by Corwell's legal team in a folder titled Evidence Willful Infringement. He didn't just borrow from Liberty Care, he took full public credit. Intent served cold. By the time the episode hit Spotify, Corwell had already gone into launch mode. Our version of Liberty Care wasn't just finished, it was refined. We had alpha results from 5 partner clinics, glowing testimonials, and a UI demo so sharp it made Greg's screenshots look like a high school group project. We dropped it 1 month before Helix's so-called launch. A Friday blitz, press, a live stream keynote, and a doctor from Harvard calling it revolutionary before minute 2. The buzz immediate. The impact devastating. Healthcare. IT Twitter trended under Dianchtos Liberty Care rising. Shareholders noticed. Competitors noticed. And over at Helix Dynamics, buried in a Slack thread, somewhere between panic and denial, someone finally asked the question they should have asked weeks earlier. Wait, didn't we already have something like this in the archives? But it was too late. Greg had already gone on record publicly proudly. He'd slashed budgets, made promises to the board, tied his name, his title, his entire reputation to something he didn't own. And me? I sat back in my chair, headphones on, listening to his podcast interview on repeat, while a wave of emails from journalists hit my inbox. I didn't reply. I just smiled. Because Greg had built his empire on a stolen crown, and the executioners were already sharpening their blades. The cracks started the moment Liberty Care went live. Not quietly, loudly. We launched across every major channel: clinical thought leaders, healthcare influencers, partner clinics, posting demos and testimonials. Within 48 hours, the trial app had racked up over 500,000 downloads. One news outlet called it a rare fusion of empathy and engineering. The Verge headline read, "They built the future without permission. Inside Helix chaos." I know, because people started talking former colleagues, whispering in DMs, screenshots from Slack back-channel leaks. Panic. Did someone leak our deck? Why does their UI look exactly like ours? Are we being watched? Greg's first reaction: rage, then denial, then PR spin. He called an emergency all hands. No slides, no structure, just Greg on stage white-knuckling the mic, like it held him up sweating through his designer blazer. "We were first," he barked. "We're still ahead. We're not letting some knockoff app derail us." He paced like a desperate preacher trying to rewrite the gospel mid-sermon. Then came the line. The moment he lit the final match. "You know what we used to call Dana's pet projects?" He said, fake nostalgia coating his voice. The museum of failed ideas. Laughter followed awkward, strained performative. The kind of laughter people use to survive embarrassment. The moment was recorded, time-stamped, and forwarded to me by someone still inside. That night, I sat on my couch, sipping wine in the quiet blue glow of my laptop, watching him fall apart in real time. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just watched. I let the feeling settle over me, slow and steady, like warm water over frostbitten hands. Greg thought he was dismissing a ghost. What he didn't realize was that his petty jab on that stage had just become Exhibit A in the case that would crush him. Because while he stood there gripping the mic and faking control, his legal team was already firing off a cease and desist letter 10 pages of legal theater. Stuffed with jargon, misplaced confidence, and a demand that Corwell immediately stop using what they claimed was proprietary material, originating from Helix Dynamics' internal R&D. Corwell's reply, 12 words, Could you please clarify the date your company began developing this project? We sent it and went quiet. And silence. In corporate warfare, that's the sound that keeps people awake at night. For 2 full days, there was nothing. No press, no updates, no spin. Then a courier showed up at Helix's headquarters. Charcoal suit, leather satchel, and a sealed gold-embossed envelope. Inside, a certified copy of our Liberty Care patent. My licensing agreement with Corwell. Time-stamped alpha test results from 5 clinics. And best of all, Greg's original rejection email headers intact. The cover letter was clean, clinical, surgical. But the message was unmistakable. Checkmate is now a formality. Greg had turned the idea. He laughed off into the centerpiece of his brand. And now, that centerpiece was collapsing beneath him. I sat in the center of it all. Calm, anchored, watching the storm circle finally bending to the architecture I'd designed. That infamous line from his all-hands meeting it was never just a throwaway insult. It was the trigger. And I had just pulled it. The lawsuit hit like a meteor on a Tuesday morning. 23 pages filed in federal court, backed by citations, timelines, and receipts that didn't just expose Greg's theft. They torched his credibility. Willful infringement. That's the phrase that flips the board. It triples damages. It names names. And this time, it named Greg Whitmore. Not just Helix, not just the board. Greg himself. Attached were the sealed patent, the notarized Corwell agreement development timelines, and the final blow, the email where Greg rejected Liberty Care. His words, his timestamp, his downfall. By noon, the financial press had caught wind. Headlines screamed Corwell Systems files devastating IP lawsuit against Helix Dynamics CEO. Leaked documents suggested Greg Whitmore was personally involved in patent theft. Within 48 hours, Helix Dynamics stock plummeted, down 36%. That wasn't a dip, it was an evacuation. Institutional investors jumped ship. News anchors speculated, live dissecting every angle. Former employees emerged from the shadows, sharing stories they'd long feared to tell. Then came the sharpest twist. Word leaked that Helix's board convened an emergency meeting not about the product or the lawsuit, but about Greg. Behind closed doors, the vote was swift. 10-2 in favor of immediate termination. No severance, no transition, just a terse press release. Helix Dynamics announces leadership change amid legal review. Translation: Greg was out and everyone was praying it was enough to save the sinking ship. I watched the press conference on my laptop, just like I'd watched Greg's smirking all-hands meeting months earlier. But this time, no smirk. Just a board spokesperson reading scripted lines about accountability ethics and strategic forward realignment. Greg didn't appear. No tweets, no statements. He vanished. And I felt something unexpected calm. No fireworks, no triumph. Just the quiet clarity that comes when you've tied every loose end and the machine finally starts to grind to a halt. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was resolution. It was closure. The plan had been built piece by piece. One rejection email, one signed contract, one recorded conversation. And now, it was complete, irrefutable. Helix scrambled into emergency settlement talks, but the damage was done. Clients fled. Employee morale turned radioactive. The only lifeboat was held by those they'd tried to bury. Greg was out. Helix was cornered. And Liberty Care. Liberty Care was just getting started. The settlement figure, so large the decimal looked like a typo. Helix folded like a cheap lawn chair. Press called it historic crippling and unthinkable defeat for a once dominant tech player. But the money. My money, 9 figures. Most of the settlement funds were wired directly to Corwell Systems. The rest came as licensing royalties. Damages! A hefty cut reserved for the woman whose failed idea became the most expensive corporate lesson of the decade. The willful infringement charge shattered Greg Whitmore's defenses. Without the company's shield, Greg was personally on the hook. The courts didn't hesitate. They came at him like an unforgiving winter storm. To avoid total bankruptcy, He sold everything, his stock options, his penthouse condo, his lakeside cabin in Michigan, even the Tesla he once parked diagonally like it was too good for the lot. By the end, Greg was living in a modest two-bedroom rental just outside Phoenix, driving a leased Civic, and shopping for suits at whatever outlet mall was nearest. I never reached out. I never gloated. That's not how this played out, because this wasn't about watching him suffer. It was about proving that I was never the problem. Liberty Care didn't just succeed, it dominated. Within the first quarter, we signed contracts with 3 major hospital networks. Venture capitalists were practically foaming at the mouth to invest. Healthcare panels started calling me the visionary behind the interface, asking for quotes on innovation and inclusion, the same ones I'd spent years begging to be heard by. They didn't know. They didn't need to. I'd already won. That night, I sat in a restaurant, all velvet and hush, the kind with wine lists thicker than the Book of Job. At a corner table, nursing something imported and aged, probably more expensive than my first car. A war dress I hadn't bought on sale. Lipstick, like war paint. The CEO of Corwell arrived late on purpose and slipped into the seat across from me like he'd done this 1,000 times. No flattery. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a check the size of a postcard, and slid it across the white linen tablecloth. No envelope, no fanfare, just numbers and a signature enough zeros to retire me 10 times over. "Thank you," he said, folding his hands. Liberty Care wasn't just a great product. It was the perfect legal crowbar we needed to break them. I stared at the check long enough to see my name spelled right for once. "You're welcome," I said, and I meant it. He left after shaking my hand like we were generals in a war neither would admit was personal. He ordered dessert, something rich and unnecessary. And then I did the one thing I hadn't allowed myself since this all began. I laughed. Not polite, not performative. I laughed. Because the Museum of Failed Ideas had a new wing built from titanium wireframes and spite. And I was the curator, the architect, the god, and the phoenix. Let them remember my name. Let them choke on it. I was never just an idea. I was the reckoning. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.